Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be back with you again, and wonderful to be back with my friend and colleague, Fiorella Isabel, who's almost on my time zone now. We made a bit of a mistake yesterday because I forgot that Lebanon actually put its clocks backwards, I suppose, back, because Syria never did. So anyway, all very confusing. I don't know why we have separated time zones anyway, to be honest. And yet again, we're coming in at a stage in world events where it's just becoming more and more chaotic, where the peace president is effectively waging war against pretty much every continent in the world today. And we're going to try and cover some of the escalation globally that's being instigated by Trump and his Ministry of War. We're entering very Orwellian territory, actually, with all of these renames and rebrandings of US aid and all of the sort of complex of power that now exists within the United States, headed up very much, of course, by Palantir and mass surveillance and ICE and all of these techniques that are being used to suppress free speech in the land of liberty and freedom. But let's start with the events in New York and the election of Mayor Zoran Mamdani. And coming to the discussion that you had with Pastor, where, of course, you pointed out that he's neither a savior nor a threat, which I totally agree with. And when one looks at his background and at his very early messaging, it's very clear that he's headed into big power politics, which, of course, means that one has to abandon any kind of ideology that challenges power and the ruling elite. So, Fee, just give us a breakdown on what you think is really going on.
Well, I hate even talking about this because this whole week I've been talking about it
Yeah, sorry.
nonstop. And so by the time I usually we don't discuss this sort of thing on our show, which is why the reason we're discussing it though is to point out how ridiculous it is in comparison to what's going on out there. You have people
Exactly.
in the United States like these, so-called leftists who think they're very radical, who think that they're, part of some sort of resistance or opposition in the US to power. And yet they're supporting the Nepo baby, which is like the child of a very wealthy person. They're supporting this guy who came from wealth, who comes from this background of I would say, a background of not just intellectual, but just not necessarily this gritty working class background they're making it out to be. And as Vanessa stated, he really didn't go away from that. You look, everybody can come from any background and actually walk the walk, do an action that thinks that they're saying. But this guy, from very early on, he surrounded himself with the likes of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who I call AOCIA, Barack Obama, Elizabeth Warren, the political elite in the United States and the Democratic Party. And so the point that I'm trying to make is that he is just a different brand of more of the same of that. And what a lot of these people still haven't learned, because I've been repeating myself for 8 years now, is that this is just another face, the latest, fashion attire of the season for this brand of progressives. And they like to label themselves, and I'm so sick of labels at this point, but they like to label themselves as a socialist. He's self-labeled a socialist. He is backed by Soros, and not just, George Soros and his son Alex Soros, who, by the way, wrote a piece, or shared a piece, excuse me. He shared a piece from Haaretz that said Israel is not committing genocide. And so that's the stance that he's being supported by. And the first thing he did when he won as mayor against Andrew Cuomo is he went out there and basically said that he's going to fight anti-Semitism because, there was a swastika that was painted outside the window of, I don't think it was a school or something. And that he decided that that's the first thing he's going to do, that he's
So why
going to
not
fight.
just say you're going to fight against extremism and Nazism? Like, why do you have to bring in the anti-Semitism messaging?
Because it's a virtue signal, right?
Yeah, of course
to the
it is,
people of New York. And let's be real, the New York is full of Zionists. I mean, this is where they're coming into illegally occupied Palestinian territories, and they're they're taking this land. A lot of them are from New York. I mean, this is this is the common thing. So he would not have gotten there without the approval of somebody higher up. The same way Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't go into Congress without the approval. I mean, this is controlled wins, controlled opposition of sorts. And the reason they're doing this is because they've realized they can't just oppose people. They need a new generation that appears progressive, that can take a lot of these people in, that can take their slogans and rebrand them to the newer generations. And so that's exactly what's happening here. And my irritation is that a huge portion of people on, in media even are just like, oh my gosh, this is so good. It's like, have you not learned? Have you not seen what's happened the last few years? Or is it just because it's beneficial to feel like this? And it's a lot of the people that say that they're for Palestine, that they're supportive of that. But how can you be supportive of that and clearly ignore the red flags around this guy, the money ties? He just created a 501c4, and this 501c4 means that it's dark money. So not only is he saying he hates billionaires while being funded by Soros, he's also saying he is, free of any corporate money. But the money he's getting funding this private 501c4, we don't know what kind of money he's getting. That's why it's called dark money. And so a lot of people are just lying to themselves in an effort to have this hopium. And we're here again. Vanessa and I are stomping on your hopium because, I believe the hopium eventually leads to bad decisions and repetitions of the same cycle.
It delays the inevitable. It delays the inevitable.
Yeah. So,
and the thing is, you don't have to be 100% in opposition. You can take whatever win is facilitated by what has just happened in New York while remaining aware of the traps. And the problem is, in my opinion, most people don't recognize the traps. Or if you point out the traps to them, they're like, oh, you're being so negative, you're being so nihilistic, and so on. But there are going to be 1 million other traps between now and whatever future that we're working towards as a collective humanity, right? And if you ignore those traps, it's going to take a huge lot longer to actually arrive at the point where change can happen, because general consensus demands that change. That's my point. So, it's like we're going to talk about Syria, and in so doing, we can look at some of the advantages of the changes that are going on inside Syria. And I kind of relate that to what's happening in New York. Well, there are potentially some positives. Sorry, I keep interrupting you.
No. I was just going to say the other part of this in relation to everything that's happening in West Asia is that these people, the drive in the US is to cause a major divide to keep us distracted from what Donald Trump is actually doing, not just domestically, but foreign policy wise. So this guy's being painted as a radical communist for the right? And not only that, he's being painted as somebody that's going to come in and impose this, totalitarian Islamic state, and that's what these people are believing. And they're all saying this, and they're spreading all of this. And I've seen some people, even in Russia, spread this type of of thing that he's this, look at this communist coming in, he's going to spread all this stuff. And it's like, what are you talking about? And then on the left, it's like the other thing where they're like, oh, everything's going to be sunshine and rainbows because he's going to do this and that, when he has, first of all, he's a mayor. He doesn't have the power, the federal authority to do any of that. And second of all, clearly he's surrounded by the establishment light people. So that's not going to happen. So but in this, the response is, oh, these people are just racist, Islamophobics, right? And it's like, okay, but that's what they want you to focus on. Like, this is not, it's not just about him being Muslim that they're opposing him. That's the point. When you have someone like that, that's not who they say they are, you can't even argue. It makes the nuance go out the window, because it's like, yeah, he might be Muslim, but at the same time, is he standing up for any sort of actual resistance against Zionism, beyond the veneer of it, beyond the superficial cosmetics of it? You know, is his wife that's being depicted all over the place, this you know, she's a representation of woman power or whatever they're saying. It's like, is she really, when she's not speaking out against the atrocities that are happening in Syria by the Takfiris, and she's pro regime change? So like we can't win one way or the other.
Yeah. And I think also what's really important, those that support Palestine but don't support the end of Israel don't really support Palestine, because what that actually means is that you're supporting Palestinian victimhood. You're only supporting Palestinians when they're victims of, whether it's apartheid, whether it's genocide, whether it's just a daily death toll by the Zionist entity, both in the occupied territories, West Bank and in Gaza, right? And then regionally, also in Lebanon, because not forgetting there are Palestinian refugee camps from 1948 onwards here in Lebanon. There are Palestinian refugees in Syria that have been targeted since the regime change war began against Syria, right? And yeah, his wife, Rama Douaji, who's American Syrian, but grew up, I think, as far as I know, in the UAE, which of course is a #1 ally of the Zionist entity and was created as such by the British. The British created Saudi Arabia and UAE to both develop a Wahhabi influence, so a Muslim Wahhabi influence, that is aligned with Zionism. So him being Muslim doesn't necessarily mean anyway that he's going to support any kind of resistance against Zionist expansionism in the region by any means, by any stretch. He could easily be, you know, pro Wahhabi, pro alliance, pro normalization with Israel to bring in the whole GCC complex to overwhelm the region and to break down Syrian history, heritage, and culture and build Dubai and Damascus, right? That could be very easily what he's pro. Most Muslims in America follow that kind of line because they want to enter the elite circles, which is what he's in, basically. And so immediately that has to raise questions. And I'm sorry, if you're supporting Palestinian victimhood, forget it. We're past that stage. You know, we're at the stage where the whole region is effectively at war against the United States and the Zionist complex. And if you're basically softballing with Zionism, then you're useless, to be honest. Other than perhaps changing some, you know, internal policies in New York. But I don't even see that happening. And many people are making this fuss about him being supported by Zionist sects that are effectively, allegedly against Zionism. But they're not pro-Palestinian resistance, so hello. You know, no, forget it. Like, we're beyond the stage of softball. We're beyond the stage of saying, like people did when Robert Kennedy Jr. attached himself to the Trump campaign, and people were saying, oh, yeah, but, you know, he's saying all this stuff now, let him get to power, and then he'll make the changes. Yeah, right, we're still waiting, and the genocide is still ongoing. So we need to stop this, really, because it's honestly a waste of breath and a waste of time. And I'm kind of with you on this. I don't want to talk about kind of the terms we use, the politics people have, because it's meaningless now. It's absolutely meaningless unless you stand for the humanity in this region and you stand for their right to resist. Don't bother, seriously. Because all you're doing is prolonging the agony for the people here. Right.
Yeah.
And so supporting someone like Mamdani and waiting for him to do something means that you're not going to do anything. Not you. I mean, whoever is supporting him isn't going to
Yeah.
do something because they're going to wait for him to do something and it's never going to happen. And a year down the line, people are going to, be scratching their heads and saying, well, why didn't he do anything? Well, because he's captured.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And his wife, Rama Douaji, you're right. She was working with anti-Assad activists. She was totally
yeah.
pro regime change. And look what that has brought to Syria and to the region. It was the greatest blow, apart from the assassination of Said Hassan Nasrallah. It was the biggest blow to the resistance axis and for Palestine. And this was the whole point. This is why Syria had to be brought down. That's why Mossad were working more against Syria than against Lebanon, because they knew once Syria fell, then Lebanon would be isolated and weakened, although it's still proving a thorn in their side. But still, the land bridge would be gone and Syria would be thrown into chaos. The forces that might have come to the assistance of Lebanon and the resistance factions here are no longer really cohesive. They still exist because Syrian Arab Army soldiers and commanders who left in December 2024, there's more than 100,000 in Lebanon and Iraq that are ready. But it's not like Syria is no longer a sovereign state that stands in challenge to Zionist expansionism. And we can talk about this. But if you're going to support Palestine and you're not going to support Iran, Yemen, Syria, Iraqi resistance, and Lebanese resistance, then forget about it. Because if you don't support them, you're effectively isolating Palestine and Palestinians.
They only support Palestine in name. Like
Yeah.
so the last point I
victimhood.
want to make about these people is exactly like they and this is very Western centric, okay? It's not just the United States, but it tends to be generally the majority of
Yeah.
Europe and the UK. They love to support people, as Vanessa said, when they're victims, and to have this label of like, we stand for Palestine, we support Palestine, we're allies, blah, blah, blah. But when it comes down to it, really, if the war were at their doorstep, they would just completely not be those people. They can do it as long as they can say the slogans, as long as they can chant whatever they need to chant. And I'm not trying to be like mean, but this is the reality. I've been around these people. I've seen it firsthand in the world of activism in Los Angeles. They like the slogans, they like the banners, they like the posters, but when it comes down to it, they don't really dive deep into the region, the history, the just the knowledge, the understanding from the perspective of that side. They want to impose their belief of what it is to help, of what it is to just support. But it is only in slogans. It's not really real, and that's why they don't make the effort to actually understand why you can't support Palestine and also ignore everything else that's there, or also be this pro-regime change in Syria type of character. Because if you understood how things work and understood how everything is connected and how these are all the same people oppressing the people of the region, then you wouldn't need to make those crazy like weird divisions. You would just understand like this is what that means. And so they don't understand that because they don't really want change. They just want to talk about change. They want to worship the next person to do something, and they just want to vote and think that that's going to change anything. And we're past that. We're past voting in the United States. It's not going to happen. It's not going to change a thing, whether it's at the federal level, whether it's at the mayoral level, whether it's at, it's just beyond, I guess I would say, like a very local level, it's just, it doesn't do anything because everything is captured. People are selected, and people who are actual threats to power will not be paraded around mainstream media. They would not be pushed in with such approval from the establishment, and they wouldn't be, getting all of this, and people just get so tricked because he's getting the hate from, the Zionists and the hate from the far right. But that's exactly why he's there. That's exactly what they need. They need people to just talk about him and not talk about what's actually happening in the region, while we're all focused on him and what Donald Trump is doing by now threatening Iraq, by Israel pivoting towards Lebanon and continuously attacking them. Not that they ever left, because this whole time, Vanessa, this whole
No.
time, well, there's been constant attacks in South Lebanon, and we can talk about that because this is what people like continuously ignore while they're saying rah rah rah, everything's great. We have a Muslim. It's really reminiscent of
Yeah.
Obama, right? We have a
I
black
was going to
president.
say
We
it's
have
a
a
baby Obama.
yes, yeah.
Because I'm seeing people talking about him for the next Democrat president and so on, even though he wasn't born in the United States. But I think the electoral rule is that if one of his parents was either born or resident or is a US citizen, he can still run for president. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert in that. But even the fact that they're already messaging this just smacks to me of baby Obama. Like we've got another Obama trajectory on our hands, and of course we know how Obama turned out, right? The king of drone warfare, particularly in Yemen. But yeah, I mean, I think it is incredibly important to relate this to being a distraction when Trump effectively through Pete Hegseth and through Rubio and Vance and so on is ramping up war rhetoric pretty much globally. I mean, we've now got genocide of Christians in Nigeria. And despite the fact that WikiLeaks in 2014 warned that this would actually be weaponized, in other words,
Yes.
the war against Christians would be weaponized to enable the responsibility to protect intervention by Washington in Nigeria. And Africa now will come back to this, but it's definitely a theater of war right now. And of course, it's a theater of war also economically from a trade perspective between Russia, China, and the United States, and then the older colonial powers like France, particularly, and Britain, right? But if we look at what's happening here regionally, while all of this sort of Mamdani hysteria is going on in the United States, which is very much distracting away from what's happening here. You have Hegseth, who had a conversation with Abazi, the Iraqi defense minister, basically saying to him, look, there's about to be a regional war, and we're threatening you that if any of the resistance factions in Iraq get involved, you know what our response will be. It was a direct threat, which is quite extraordinary in the world of diplomacy to kind of say, look, we're going to unleash a regional war. He's not saying against who exactly, but he's saying if any Iraqi military factions, either within the official Iraqi military or within the resistance non-state actors, get involved, we're threatening Iraq. We're not threatening just the resistance, we're actually threatening Iraq. So this was, in effect, a declaration of war, right? At the same time, they're ramping up rhetoric in the region. Tom Barrack, the economic hawk, Trump's envoy in the Middle East, along with, God, I can never remember her name, Morgan Ortagus, who's one of his kind of hangers-on who appears with him at press conferences and so on, has effectively washed his hands of Lebanon now. He's given Israel the green light to do what they have to disarm Hezbollah, because effectively Trump's policy hasn't worked. which was to get the military in Lebanon to disarm Hezbollah on behalf of Washington, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia was using economic pressure by saying it would provide the money for reconstruction if Hezbollah disarms. They're trying to shut down the independent banking in Lebanon, the independent banking system that is affiliated to Hezbollah, that works on a non-usury system. So you can take a loan, you don't pay any interest, and you pay back the loan in full. Usually people take in gold, they take a loan against the value of the gold, and then when they pay back the loan, they get their gold back. So of course the West doesn't like this because it wants the IMF in, it wants the country totally debt enslaved.
That's why he was maligning it, right? In this speech he gave,
absolutely,
he was just saying,
oh,
they don't even have
I mean, he's used terms, he's called Lebanon a failed state. He's called the Lebanese animalistic. I mean, the Orientalism and racism in his addresses to the Lebanese
He's
is
Lebanese.
Quite extraordinary. Yeah, his background is Lebanese. He's from Lebanese trading family, nothing special, right? And then, of course, there's this plan apparently to bring Tony Blair in. Yet again, Tony Blair raises his criminal head to effectively run some kind of international coalition to establish a free trade zone in the south of Lebanon. So in other words, to steal Lebanese land, impose foreign occupation, which by default would be Zionist occupation, and create this independent free zone, which will effectively cut off the south of Lebanon from Lebanon and create this kind of Zionist controlled territory. Again, exactly what they intend to do with Gaza. We know this from the multiple plans that have been proposed since October the 7th and even before to basically bring Gaza and southern Lebanon into this whole India, Middle East economic corridor hub, right? Create these free trade zones, which are not going to be of any benefit to the Lebanese. And effectively, there are going to be hundreds of thousands of displaced Lebanese from the south in order to create this free trade zone. And heaven forbid, the Lebanese are actually saying, no, we really don't want this to happen. We don't want to leave our homes in the south. So we have Palestine all over again, the same as is happening in southern Syria. The Israeli forces are increasing their military footprint in the south of Syria. They're displacing people from their homes in regions around Quneitra, Dara, which are close to the occupied Golan territory, right, in the south. And now we have this situation where Barak is washing his hands of it because they haven't succeeded through diplomacy, whatever their idea of diplomacy, coercion, threatening, intimidation, bullying hasn't worked. So now basically they've given the green light to Jerusalem, that's his terminology, to effectively come in and disarm Hezbollah. And then we've had Hezbollah have actually put out a very strong statement where they're effectively saying, no, like we have the right to resist. If you're attacking our land, our people, we reserve the right to resist. And this was an open letter written to the President Joseph Aoun, to the Prime Minister Nawaf Salam, who's a total puppet of the Zionists and Washington, and to the Parliament Speaker Nabil Berri, who's very much aligned with Lebanese sovereignty, if not necessarily aligned with the resistance. He's very much in favor of Lebanese sovereignty. So he's against the Washington Zionist plan. And what that effectively has done is basically put the ball back in Hezbollah's court and saying, well, no, we reserve the right to take the initiative now because we have to defend our people in the south that are getting bombed and assassinated on a daily, if not hourly basis. And then, of course, a few days before that, Joseph Aoun had actually told the army to start preparing to defend Lebanese territory. So the two things have happened at once. At the same time as Hegseth is threatening Iraq to not get involved if there is a regional war. So it's clear what's happening here. Hezbollah, I don't think, would put out this kind of statement unless they had intelligence that a war was being planned, and therefore they had to prepare and make a statement where they publicly say, we are going to defend ourselves. So they're preparing also the other factions in Lebanon for what is going to happen, which is, to a degree, they have to, because Hezbollah is also part of the political process in Lebanon. So they have to be very clear about their strategy and their plans to a degree. Of course, they're not going to say exactly what they're going to do or where they're operating from, etc. And since then, what have we seen? We've seen an increase in the Israeli bombing, particularly of villages in the south, where they've forced evacuation of the residents to 500 meters away from the areas where they bombed. They're making the same claims that everything they're bombing is housing Hezbollah. Exactly what they did in Gaza. Everything was Hamas, so they bombed everything and obliterated everything. And so the intention is, of course, to whether it will go to a full-scale war, I don't yet know, in all honesty. I don't know whether Hezbollah will still try to contain it. But if it does go to a full-scale war, then there is potential for bringing in Yemen. There is potential for the Iraqi resistance getting involved because, of course, this is the big threat to Israel, is that they perceive that the Iraqi resistance might enter through Jordan and arrive at the Jordanian-Israeli border and be able to target them from there. There's also the former Syrian Arab Army in Iraq and in Lebanon that at that point might get involved, because then you also have the Takfiri element, the Jolani element in Syria that Israel and Washington might deploy against Lebanon. So, we're entering a very pivotal moment. And at the same time, Reuters reported yesterday that the US now is going to return to Syria, but to Damascus. And from October, they've been using the C-130 planes, the transport planes, coming into the Mezzeh air base, which was a former Syrian military airbase to the south of Damascus. So effectively, what does this mean? This means that Trump is sending troops into Damascus to support the Israeli project, right? And in my opinion, if there is a war against Lebanon, then America will be placed. So you'll have the Israelis in Mount Hermon, which is the highest point on the Syria-Lebanese border, the US in Damascus at an air base, so presumably they're going to be bringing in air power to there, and then also at Al Tanif. So that entire line from Lebanon across to the Jordan-Iraqi border will be under the control of Israel and the United States.
Now, my question in all of that is, where will Russia be in all? And I was going there because it's interesting, the sequence of events that have been happening with Russia and the meetings with Jolani and the meetings also with Israel and the clear designation of that their bases will be protected. What does that now say in terms of how Russia is responding, say, to Iran, to Venezuela? Because this is all tied. Because if we want to talk about a big war, Maria Corina Machado is out there saying that Venezuela
yes.
is victim to Hamas, Hezbollah, Iranian agents, Russian agents,
everyone.
I mean, everybody that she could have possibly named is in Venezuela now, working for Maduro, and they're all terrorists, and and earlier, if you remember, we discussed like months ago, Trump saying that there were Iranian sleeper cells coming through the border into the United States. So what I'm thinking here is like, I genuinely believe that they have pivoted greatly to allow Israel to continue, as they said. Of course, right after saying that Mr. Peace President achieved a historical ceasefire in Gaza, they've literally just gone in straight, ramped it up. And now, right, the focus is Hezbollah. Because a lot of people were surprised that it wasn't Iran. But it's not surprising at all, because Hezbollah has been very effective at this at destroying the Zionists, right?
Mm.
And so it seems like to me that they're trying to arm themselves at various points, including Iraq. And they're very threatened by the unity. And what really irritates me is that none of this would have been possible without the fall of Syria. Everything you just mentioned
Yeah,
would not have been possible if Syria was still
of
standing,
course. Yeah.
And so this is now, we're looking at the sequence of events as the progression of the Greater Israel Project in conjunction with the United States simultaneously aiding Israel and also attacking the Latin American resistance sectors that are left,
Yeah.
including Venezuela.
Yeah. That
So
are
where does
aligned
Russia
with
come in?
Iran. So this is very important, right?
Yeah.
And absolutely right. And I think what is really interesting, one, you've got Jolani, Ahmed al-Sharaa, as he's been rebranded to get the bounty lifted off his head, right? Is heading to meet with Trump in the United States on Monday. So this comes immediately after the meeting in the Kremlin. And even after the Jolani Assad al-Shabani meeting, there was a follow-up meeting with the defense minister of the Takfiri unelected regime in Syria, in Moscow, right? And as a result of that meeting, there are multiple reports, and I've sort of had it semi-confirmed by people on the ground in Syria, that there is now potential for Russia to expand its bases to include Hama and Homs. So it is basically reinforcing its base in Qamishli, which is in the northeast, which is effectively in alliance with the Kurdish factions that are covered by Washington and Israel, because the Kurds are needed to have a semi-autonomous region in the northeast to enable the creation of the David's corridor from the south, where Israel is gaining a much stronger foothold and now will receive the support of the United States to have that foothold, to extend up the eastern corridor of Syria into the Kurdish-held section, where the Russians have a base at Qamishli, which is being enabled to remain, right? In the coastal area, which has been the area that has been really, along with the south, under the greatest attack by the Takfiris against the Alawites, but not only against the Alawites, against the Christians, against Sunni moderates, etc. Anyone that stands in the way of the Takfiri ideology has been massacred on the coastal area, where Russia had its existing base in Latakia and Tartus at Haimamim. Now, Russia, we know, has been bringing back in I believe they're bringing back in personnel. Some people are arguing against that and saying they've kept the same number of personnel. But in my opinion, if they're bringing in equipment, they need personnel for the equipment, right? That's logical. So it doesn't make sense to me that they're not going to also increase the personnel to actually manage the equipment that's being brought back in to the coastal area. Since that meeting with the defense minister, they've talked about putting bases in Hama and Homs, which are the areas really that touch on the border with Lebanon in the north, and the central area between Idlib and Homs. Now, I'm sure it doesn't mean they're going to take control of the whole province, because Homs province is massive. It goes from east to west across all of Syria. So it goes from Iraq to Lebanon, basically. But the fact that this is being talked about quite openly, while the US is building up military presence again in Syria in preparation for whatever regional escalation is going to happen, and to protect Israeli interests, there's still talk about Russia acting as a kind of UNIFIL operation in the south, right? All of this is happening under US influence, direct US influence. Russia has the assistance of Turkey and Israel. Yes, sure. But none of this will happen without Washington's green light. So this has to be clear, okay? Now, people can interpret that how they want. And when we say, let's look at the positives. The positives is there will be some protection. I have Syrians in Russia who are saying to me, maybe we can come home if this happens, right? So I'm not going to be negative about that. But ultimately, the negative side of it is that this is just partitioning Syria. And if Russia is going to be enabled to take control of the coastal area, including parts of Homs and Hama, that can only happen with agreement with Trump and Washington. It can't happen any other way.
Yeah.
So what does this mean for the future of Syria? It's not great. You know what I mean? So it's federalization is never a good thing. Carving a country up was, if you remember, John Kerry's Plan B back in 2016. But I mean, not only in 2016, it's part of the clean break doctrine. It's part of the plan from the beginning to create the environment for Greater Israel. Whether Greater Israel means a geographical Greater Israel or an economic Greater Israel, I tend to think the latter, because Israel itself doesn't have the manpower to actually occupy the territory that it seeks to expand into. But it does have the economic ability through the Gulf states that we created to partner the Zionist entity. It does have that ability to rule by proxy, to settle by proxy. So in the south, using the Druze and other elements in the south, in the northeast, using the Kurdish factions to effectively provide settlement and control of resources in the northeast, and the US to enable the David Corridor connection, and then the GCC to come in with investment, industry, the Dubaiification of Syria. And Russia effectively gets what it wanted, which was its launchpad to Africa, right? It never wanted to abandon that. That was the one priority for Putin, to maintain that at all costs. And so that's what they've done, in my opinion. They've done a deal with Washington and the Takfiris and Israel and Turkey to enable Russia to maintain its presence. And to some degree, is that going to provide security for people in that area and expel the Takfiris? Yes. That's a short-term positive. Long-term, I don't see it as a positive, because effectively you're breaking up Syria. We're going back to kind of French mandate days. The only difference is you have Russia instead of France.
Well, and that's the thing people don't understand about Russia is like it's not even necessarily they're not looking at it as, an imperialism. They're looking at it as securing their national
Yeah,
interests, which is how
yeah.
they operate like pragmatically, right? And at least this government. And again, because I make it a point, obviously, in the same way in the US, things aren't just one thing. In Russia, things, not everybody agrees. It's not a monolith. But right now, when you look at what Vladimir Putin is doing and the relationships they're making, everything you said about the United States having to have made some sort of agreement with Russia in order for, and Israel, obviously, in order for Russia to expand its interest in Syria. Well, that's what I've been saying in terms of the United States and Russia having this conversation in even it's not even as back channeled as it would appear, because Putin's most trusted advisor, right, Kirill Dmitriev, has been going on all over the US, talking to the Trump administration, to various members of the Trump administration, talking to very shady members of the Trump administration, I might add. He himself is quite interesting, having gotten his master's from Harvard and his bachelor's from Stanford. And it's he is a character that has been talking a lot about this connection between the Russians and the Americans in terms of the Christian traditional values and all of
Yeah.
that. And it's interesting how at every constant appearance he's made or every comment he's made on X, he talks about how we're getting closer and closer to having an agreement between the United States and Russia. And a lot of
Hmm.
people, a lot of analysts in particular from Russia have been very hesitant to say that because they're still very much on, oh no, Russia doesn't believe the United States. They're just they're just like giving them what they want to hear. Russia's plans are different. And this is the majority of the analysis from the Russian, like not Russian analysts, Americans or Europeans and Russia analyzing things. And they're saying, no, like Russia doesn't buy it, like, because the United States isn't serious. They don't want to end things with Russia. They want to continue this. And in a way that's true. The United States doesn't fully want to give Russia what it wants. But I think the bigger thing here is that it's beyond that. It's more of like
Mm.
Russia wants an economic transactional relationship with the United States. They want to normalize relationships with the United States. They want to be on equal footing with not just the United States, but the rest of the world. They want to be looked on as a world power
Yeah.
that is equal standing and has the ability to really take on, to be on equal footing, to sit at the table. They want a seat at the table, essentially.
Hmm.
That's not coming from an anti-imperialist or revolutionary stance. It's coming from a we want to participate in the global capitalist system and have that ability to be looked on as a power.
Hmm.
That's a power player. And that's multipolarity, the way they're looking at it.
Yeah.
Multipolarity is not, we're going to save Palestine, we're going to save Africa. In fact, that's the opposite of what's happening with Marwa's article that she wrote about Sudan and China.
Mm.
And I think that it's this everything that's happening now kind of points to that in terms of how Russia is reacting to everything. So it does let me to question like how the way they would react in that situation in Syria is sure, there's going to be some benefit for our allies, but also a lot of benefits for us and our
Mm.
continued expanded interest. That's just kind of
Yeah.
like how they operate.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to note that Kirill Dmitriev was also active during the first Trump administration. And we've
Yes.
also touched on this. He met up with Tony Scaramucci at Davos in 2017. He made the connections with Eric Prince, formerly Blackwater in the United States.
Yeah.
And I've always said this. The first Trump election, which kicked Hillary Clinton into touch, was masterful by the deep state because it threw the regional alliances into disarray. Everyone thought they could do a deal with Trump. And so when you look at how Dmitriev was operating, even then, even under the first administration with Trump, it should have been very clear that when Trump was reelected in 2024, the same thing would be happening. And his connections to Ukraine are also very important. He was born in
Yes.
Kiev, right?
Yep.
And when we talked about, and people poo-pooed it when we talked about it and said, Syria was part of the deal on Ukraine. So Syria would be let go on behalf of Israel and the whole Zionist bloc in order to facilitate some kind of deal and compromise in Ukraine. Well, you had Dmitriev for sure behind the scenes negotiating from this perspective with his Ukrainian roots and his Ukrainian connections, right? He's very well connected in the US. I mean, he was
Oh,
part of the
very.
US Russia Investment Fund, which was established under Bill Clinton. So this is, you know what I mean? Like he has tentacles in pretty much every pie in the United States. And so therefore, if he's kind of Putin's Stephen Witkoff, then I think he's a very good indicator of what Russia's policy is. Otherwise, he wouldn't be in that position, apart from obviously he has familial ties and so on through his marriage and through Putin's family, his youngest daughter, I believe. So, there are those ties that probably sort of propelled him to the position
Yeah.
he's in. But nevertheless, his policies have to be seen as a reflection of what Putin is trying to achieve. Otherwise, he wouldn't be given this ability to appear publicly on American TV with Lara Logan and so on. And I've seen him in the last week retweeting Tommy Robinson. He's very much pushing the Islamophobic line, the immigrant line, the civil war line, actually. Particularly in the EU and the UK now, because he's reposting Tommy Robinson and saying, well, you know, you should be focusing on the Muslim immigrants that are facilitating these crimes and these grooming campaigns and so on. And, you know, this is an argument we have all the time, even at UK Column, that the grooming, yes, okay, there is an element of Muslim communities in Britain that's involved, but the larger scale grooming, pedophilia, child abuse, and so on comes from white establishment figures of power in the UK. So it's a distraction again. But he's very much pushing this line. I mean, in Lara Logan, he was very much talking about, you know, Europe is screwed basically because of the immigration problem and the Muslims and so on. And he's pushing this, we represent the traditional conservative line. So he's appealing to that side of the Trump followers, right? He's appealing to exactly what Trump represents, which is the expulsion of immigrants, the deportation policies, the ICE fascist tendencies, right, in the way they're arresting people and so on. He's effectively saying he supports that, unless I'm misunderstanding it.
No, you're not misunderstanding at all. That's exactly where he comes from and what he's saying. And like, it's very obvious to me, because when he graduated from Harvard, he was recruited by McKinsey. If you tell any
and
anti-imperialist and Goldman Sachs, he was an investment banker for Goldman Sachs, guys. If you tell any so-called anti-imperialist in the US, like his background without naming him, they're going to be like, oh, this guy's terrible. He's got his tentacles everywhere. Like, oh my God, he's coming from as an investment banker. But then you put the Russia thing into it and they're like, oh, I think this is something that people aren't touching because it is Russia, right? And they're like, they've created, this is why we've been trying to tell you guys, it's so important you look at things as they are instead of like as we would want them to be. Because I mean, this is Putin's close guy, and he's talking about blatantly on Twitter. He said they had 3 days of just solid meetings between the U.S. with Stephen Witkoff. So we're talking about these meetings that suddenly it pops out. When did this happen? November 7th. He talked about this because Trump went on and was talking about making progress, right? While everybody else is saying, oh no, there's no progress. This is never going to happen. It's like they're focusing on this idea that Russia wants to attack the United States, that Russia wants to, defeat the United States' empire. Because on one end, you get I would say you get the Maria Saharabas and who are just, giving the sentiments, and she's very smart and she articulates things in a way that, makes Russia look like, okay, no, we're standing against this and we're doing this. But at the same time, is it truly in opposition? Not coming from Putin's main advisor. I mean, they constantly, ever since February, they've been talking, and even before that, but this year alone, they've been talking about economic cooperation in the Arctic. They've been talking about trade. They've been talking about being excited about once this ends, how they're going to come together. And the United States is looking at Russia as in a relationship that I think is renewed, not necessarily that it's something Russia should trust, but in terms of, for example, Ukraine, in terms of the EU, they're looking at Russia and they're saying, all right, well, you've proven yourself. Let's see what you can do. And then you have Kirill Dmitriev, who comes from this world. He's a businessman, an investment banker. He's somebody that's been around not just Blackwater, but also BlackRock. His company was tied to BlackRock as well. I mean, he's got all of the things
he ticks
that
all
we
the
would
boxes, basically. Yeah.
all of the boxes, everything
Yeah.
that we would criticize, including the World Economic Forum. And so then you
And
have him
Davos. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
he's spouting all these things that you're talking about, but he's also doing it in the United States. So he's also commenting on, Mamdani's victory. He's also saying, New York is going to turn into this chaotic state where, he's giving those, I would say, dog whistles is the word to the far right in the US and the UK. And then I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, I get the attempts at connecting I would say the Christian values or whatever, even though that's a very superficial thing to just say, because in all honesty, in Russia, like the outside of the establishment, I would say here that the status quo government, the majority of people aren't particularly religious. That the Soviet Union wasn't a religious government at all. So there's, yes, there was like a counterweight to it with the Orthodox, but the majority of the youth aren't like religious. So it's interesting. It almost kind of mirrors that aspect. And so it's kind of, again, we're back at what is the reality? Well, the reality is after living, in Russia for 3 years, you kind of get a sense of what actually is and what is being presented to people, whether obviously the story that NATO spews about Russia, it just being entirely backward and not developed and entirely Putin wanting to take over Europe isn't true. But on the other end, just the one-sided, oh, everything is perfect and awesome and everybody is in agreement. And it's just, it's just this vision that you get is also not valid. So for me, it's not surprising to see somebody like Kirill Dmitriev, reaching out to the U.S. like this. But a lot of people are very confused. They're like, I don't understand why this is happening. Like, why does Russia keep, promoting Earl Musk? Why are they like promoting all these like very problematic people that are just completely shady, in Russia? And I'm like, because they want this alliance, guys. Like they've been
And
talking about it nonstop.
yeah, and I think it's also very interesting. You mentioned that, if you didn't say who this was and you just presented their CV, people would be like, no, get out of here. But I've
Yeah.
actually seen anti-imperialist, pro-BRICS people condemn someone on the I'm not going to name names, but condemn someone on the anti-imperialist side just because of their background in Goldman Sachs. But this guy goes way beyond just Goldman Sachs. I mean, we're talking Clinton, we're talking McKinsey, we're talking Goldman Sachs, we're talking Harvard, Stanford. Anyway, I mean, two of the most heavily intelligence and weird ideology infested university in the United States, right? And then the Blackwater connection, Eric Prince, the Davos WEF connection. Oh, and by the way, he's involved in the promotion and the production of the COVID-19 vaccine, the Sputnik V, right? So everything he does ties in to Agenda 2030, to all of the kind of WEF, Davos, ruling elite, transnational oligarchy, power grab, basically. Right. So it's sort of it's kind of difficult to walk back from that and say, yeah, but they're probably playing 5D chess, they're infiltrating like all of these. I can't
That
do
would be
that
like
anymore. Like I
20D
can't
chess.
even.
Like that's not 5D. That's like 20D chess. Like
Can
it's
we just
20
stop with
dimensions
this
in.
whole idea, guys? Please, go on. Like, is this like we're getting to a relatively ridiculous point where it's impossible to actually say that anything else is going on here? I mean, he's going on American news outlets and talking about it, right? It's not.
Yeah.
And actually, I did. I know we haven't got too much time left, but I did actually also want to bring up the kind of breaking information that's tying Epstein into Putin and Epstein facilitating back channel negotiations between Ehud Barak and Putin since, I think it's since 2000 onwards, whatever, and then also discussing Syria and so on. I'd be interested in your take. My take is, are we really surprised that Epstein had connections amongst the oligarchs in Russia? No, not really. Was there a necessity for there to be back-channel communications between Ehud Barak and Putin? In my opinion, no. Because from 1999 until now, and until throughout the regime change war against Syria, even after Russia's intervention in September 2015, I think between 2015 and 2021, there were 49 phone calls between Putin and Netanyahu. Ehud Barak had multiple kind of meetings and phone calls with Putin. This is all recorded at the Russian government, the government websites, right? So I don't quite see how Epstein would be beneficial in arranging back-channel communications when open-channel communications were already in existence. But I can't figure out why this story is surfacing now, whether it's to tie Putin into Epstein, whether it's to kind of, because it has become apparent to many people that Russia had a role in the fall of Syria, and so therefore there's a need to capture that narrative and turn it into something else. I mean, I'm really thinking aloud now. I don't know. I haven't come to any conclusions, but it just seems strange timing for me.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of this back channel communication being necessary just seems odd.
Well, off the bat, like drop site news comes from Ryan Grimm's The Intercept thing. So it's shady. And I don't think they were the first to attain that information. But let's say that the reason it's being dropped now is because of the attempt to politicize it against the Trump administration. It could be in this way because if you recall, the people that wanted to talk about Epstein for the longest time were on the right, and they were bringing up the whole Epstein issue and Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton's ties to Jeffrey Epstein for the longest time. And then when Donald Trump became president, there were always these beliefs throughout that he would release the Epstein files. Obviously, the first time he was president, the trial was still going on. But the second time he became president, then he promised that he would do that, and he didn't. And he has been saying that there's no such thing, that there's no list. Okay, so a lot of that discredited him in the eyes of many his supporters who were like, what the hell's going on? But the liberals used that opportunity to say that he did that because Trump is involved with Epstein. And because of the closeness now, the clear, like, I guess, no, I don't want to say love affair, but almost
attachment.
The clear,
attachment.
like, the attachment, the good relationship, good rapport between the United States and the Trump administration and the Putin. There could be, in my opinion, in a very superficial way, a way to like try to say, oh, look, Vladimir Putin, who is tied to Donald Trump, because they are trying to end this war. Look, he has ties to Jeffrey Epstein. Look at how this is, put in, and Lavrov's name came up, right, in this whole thing. So I do think that that's kind of where they're going, just based on where drop site comes from, more of the liberal and also just like the attempts of like saying only Donald Trump was involved with Epstein and Putinizing it, because still to this very moment you still have the just actual like hatred for Russians in general. And that's what's kind of crazy, because the EU just passed like new bans on Russian travel while all of this is happening. So for me, it seems like it's become like NATO, EU continuing to attack Russia versus like the Trump administration making deals and having conversations with Russia to end this. And I think that's how it's going to go until it actually does until there is an actual done deal. And right now,
Yeah.
we're just seeing a lot of the politicizing of this all. But ultimately, all of these politicians, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, a lot of them had ties to Epstein. And so it's not surprising that in Russia, which, as I've stated before, has a lot of Zionist influence already,
And
not
Chabad
just
Lubavitch
on the
influence
government
also.
level.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Chabad Lubavitch influence
Yeah,
is very strong in Russia.
it's in the yes, and also it's not just at the political level, on the economic level, on pretty much every level. Here, it's not surprising that there would be ties to that, especially if you can relate it back through Ukraine and the prostitution rings there. So there's a lot to be investigated, I think, on that end. But I agree with you. Like, why now? Why are you doing this now? This has been out there for some time. I think it's just the opportunity. But
And just
I
to
don't
be
know.
clear, it's allegedly based on leaked emails of
Yeah.
Ehud Barak, between Barak and Epstein. Just to be clear, in the drop site news investigation. But yeah, I mean, strange timing, and as I said, Russia's relationship with Israel has never needed to be back channel. It's always been extremely open, extremely friendly, very strong attachment between, there is a strong attachment between Putin and Netanyahu. And I think that's undeniable. And that, of course, colors Russia's policy in Syria, for example. And I
We don't
think
talk
just
about
very
that.
quickly, just very quickly to talk about Iran and Venezuela, because you
Yeah.
mentioned that. I think what's important, again, for people to understand is that Russia will maintain its relationship with Iran, although it will be very keen on preventing Iranian influence. It will still be looking to contain Iran, which is in line with Israel and the West. So, in other words, it's fine to deal with Iran if it's contained, but it doesn't want Iran to expand its influence, particularly into Syria. And that's always been Russian policy from the
Or
beginning.
threaten Israel in
Yeah,
any way.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But Iran is important for the North-South trade corridor. We've talked about this. It's important for its gas reserves, etc. It's important as part of Russia's economic and trade footprint in the world. And it's also perceived by Russia, and particularly by Putin, as a strong country, right? It's been under sanctions for decades. It's still managed to survive. It has resources. It's protected its borders. It's a strong country. So therefore, Russia will maintain it as an ally as long as it doesn't come into conflict with whatever Russia is trying to achieve as regards the Gulf states also, because Saudi Arabia is, again, Dmitriev is very involved also in the partnership with Saudi Arabia. And the same goes for Venezuela. Russia will come to the aid of Venezuela because Venezuela is an important ally in the collective Americas, right? It's an important ally from a resources point of view, but it's not going to come to Venezuela's aid because Venezuela is aligned with Iran. That's the difference. It's going to come to Venezuela's aid because Venezuela is important to Russia. And the same for China.
Well, and I just want to say, like, I think the aid that it will come to, in my personal opinion, is going to be extremely limited. It's not going to be what people think, like boots on the ground. So there has been, I
No.
guess,
Unless
confirmation
they
that
send
Russia.
Wagner or an equivalent. That could happen,
Well,
I
yeah,
guess.
that's a possibility. Yeah, I get that's a possibility. I see that as being risky though. I just don't see that as being their thing. I mean, I guess if it got to that level where, that
It
was
could be
necessary.
disguised as something else, though. I mean, the thing is
Yeah.
that Venezuela does have strong ties with Hezbollah, with the resistance axis. That
Yeah.
is also undeniable, and why shouldn't it? On principle, it's always defended. It's always been anti-imperialist. It's always defended the
Yeah.
oppressed in this region quite correctly, and so therefore it is allied with the non-state actors as well as the state actors in the resistance axis. And there will be, I'm sure, technology supplied, training supplied by all of these factions for Venezuela if there is a threat of war. And Russia, there's talk of the air defense systems coming in, but are they going to supply the personnel to actually use the air defense systems? Because this was the issue in Syria.
Yeah.
The S-300s, which was very much contested by Israel. Israel did not want Russia. And Netanyahu actually had a number of meetings with Putin where he was saying, no, like, don't give S-300s to Syria. But when the S-300s were actually supplied, they were never actually used. They were used by Russia, but they were not used in defense of Russian facilities, but not in defense of Syrian Arab Army or Iranian or Hezbollah positions and personnel. And the Syrian army were using the relatively older technology, which they had been trained on and which they basically kept going throughout the regime change war and defended themselves very effectively against Israeli airstrikes for the entirety of those 14 years. So, I would still raise the question, if they are really supplying air defense systems, are they supplying the training? Are they supplying the personnel? Are they supplying, I presume they would supply the parts, all of that. I'm not saying they are definitely not supplying it, but I'm saying there is still a time lapse between delivery of those systems and when they could actually be used in defense of Venezuela.
Yeah, well, all over the internet, it's
Yeah.
just being like thrown that they're supplying all of this and they're coming to their aid. I mean, apparently the deputy head of Russia's paramilitary defense, Alexei Zhurolyov, he said that Americans may be in for some surprises. I don't know, but it's supposed to be these hypersonic missiles to defend against
The
U.S. attacks. But
yeah.
You're absolutely right. I mean, like, if there is no way for the Venezuelans to operate this, then what good will it do? If there's no training, what good will it do? Is it just a PR stunt? I no, you're right. I mean, I think that there's some interest for Russia there to protect, but I also know that if Venezuela falls, it will become a pro-Zionist state, and that oil there will easily go into American Israeli hands. And the minerals will easily go into American Israeli hands. And again, like, just speaking from a pragmatic sense, that benefits the US far more than, than anything, I would say. So I'm kind of hesitant to say that Russia would really, it's an important ally in the region, and they have to do something to maintain this alliance and also maintain the reputation in a way. But how far they're willing to go, I just don't, I don't know. But a lot of
it could be posturing also. It could just be posturing. Because Trump seemed to very rapidly pivot to Nigeria once all of this rhetoric was being put out that Russia was going to supply air defense and so on. So I don't know. I mean, time will tell. Time will tell if Trump will actually go for an all-out war against Venezuela, which I somehow still highly doubt.
Yeah. I don't see the US like directly attacking Venezuela like this. I see them as still trying to assassinate key figures, and also turn people within the Maduro government that they feel like can be turned. And that's their way to go. And I actually think there's a vulnerability in that for Venezuela, more than
I mean, they tried to bribe Maduro's pilot, right, to take him to a place where he could be captured or probably assassinated, or both. So I think that is a far more likely scenario. In which case, this is a lot of posturing that's going on here, which I don't know. I mean, I think again, only time will tell. I mean, speaking to the ambassador here, he's confirmed that Russia is saying it will help, but even he has said, well, yeah, but we're important to a degree. I mean, what is it? The largest oil reserves in the world today,
in the world.
basically. So, to some degree, um, it is important for Russia to be seen to be coming to their aid. And also, I think the fall of Syria has damaged Russia's reputation as an ally. And that's another important factor to bring into this. So Russia needs to be seen to be coming to the aid of Venezuela in this sense, I think.
Yeah, needs to be seen. We'll see how deep
Yeah.
that will go. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think we
Okay.
managed to discuss mostly somehow.
It's
I don't
always
know
like,
how.
oh God, how can we cram everything in? But yeah, I guess next time we could probably do a lot more on what's going on in Africa and
Africa, yeah,
Darfur
absolutely.
and Sudan and Nigeria, Mali, Eritrea, which I think is all part of the potential war against Yemen, by the way, because of course it's all the countries, not Nigeria or Mali, but if you look at Eritrea, Sudan, Somalia,
Hmm.
it's all focused on the Horn of Africa, and that is targeting Yemen as far as I'm concerned. So be interesting to follow all of that also
There's a lot to go into
next
that,
time.
especially from the Christians being attacked and that being used now by
Yeah,
the
we
far
should
right in the
definitely talk
US.
about that. Yeah,
They're
we
saying
should
they're
definitely
kidding
talk about that.
Christians. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we'll talk
Never
about that.
mind that they're actually going to welcome the head of the Takfiris that have been ethnically cleansing Christians and Alawites and Druze in Syria, and he's coming to shake hands with Trump. And one last thing to leave people with. So, if Jolani is about to be absorbed into the anti-ISIS coalition led by the United States, so as someone pointed out on X, so Ahmad al-Shara now is going to go after Mohammed Jolani. That's how crazy politics are becoming now
Mm.
under Trump.
Good. Well, we already have everything to discuss, so
Next
we need to do
time.
it next week. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Okay,
All
guys.
right.
So thank you so much for sticking with us. Sorry if we took you off again into something that you maybe didn't want to hear, but um, hopefully, I think with kind of illumination of the traps, then we can avoid falling into them each time, and save time to actually focus on the things that will bring about transformation and change, positive transformation and change, because I don't want to use WEF language too much. But it's difficult because they've captured all of it. Anyway,
Well,
take care, everyone. Take care, Fee, and
bye
we'll be
everyone.
back together very soon. Bye.
Bye.